Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that the money in your wallet is now illegal. Not worthless, illegal. Yesterday you could buy groceries with it. Today the police can arrest you just for holding it. Sounds impossible, right? But on April 5th, 1933, this nightmare became reality for millions of Americans. Except it wasn't paper money the government wanted. It was something far more valuable. Gold. In just 30 days, ordinary citizens were forced to surrender nearly 4,000 tons of precious metal to their own government. And what they received in return was a lie so massive that its consequences echo through our economy even today. This is the story of the greatest theft in American history. To understand why the government committed this act, we need to travel back to the America of the early 1930s. The nation was drowning in the worst economic catastrophe it had ever witnessed. The Great Depression had transformed the land of opportunity into a graveyard of broken dreams. Every single day, more banks shuttered their doors forever. Families who had saved for decades watched their entire life savings evaporate overnight. Unemployment reached 25%. 1 in 4 Americans had no job, no income, no future. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Farmers burned their crops because transporting them cost more than they could sell them for. Children went to school hungry, if they went at all. In this chaos, there was only one thing Americans still trusted: gold. Solid, tangible, real. While paper money might become worthless, while banks might collapse, while the stock market might crash, gold remained gold. Families hoarded it, businesses stockpiled it, and the government feared it. For more than 50 years, the United States had operated under something called the gold standard. This wasn't just an economic policy, it was a sacred promise between the government and its people. Every single dollar bill in circulation was backed by actual gold sitting in government vaults. If you held a $10 bill, you could theoretically walk into any bank and exchange it for $10 worth of gold. No questions asked, no delays. This system had one crucial consequence. The government couldn't simply print unlimited money whenever it wanted. Every new dollar required real gold to back it up. For decades, this worked beautifully. Americans trusted their currency because they knew it represented something concrete, something real. Many families kept gold coins at home the same way people today keep emergency cash hidden in their houses. A $20 gold coin wasn't just money. It was security. It was independence. It was freedom from government control. But when the Depression struck, this entire system began crumbling. And President Franklin Roosevelt saw only one solution: break the promise. Seize the gold. Save the economy by destroying the very foundation it was built upon. By early 1933, American banks were hemorrhaging gold at a terrifying pace. Every day, panicked citizens lined up demanding their deposits back. But they didn't want paper. They wanted gold. Real, physical gold they could hold in their hands. The Federal Reserve watched helplessly as its gold reserves drained away like water through a broken dam. In just 3 months, Americans withdrew more than $750 million in gold from the banking system. That's equivalent to roughly $15 billion today. If this continued, the entire monetary system would collapse within weeks. Banks would have no gold left to back their currency. The dollar would become worthless paper. International trade would freeze. And the already devastating depression would transform into something far worse: a complete economic apocalypse. President Roosevelt had been in office for barely a month. He faced an impossible choice: honor the gold standard and watch America's economy disintegrate completely, or break the sacred promise, seize private property on a scale never attempted before, and hope history would forgive him. He chose the latter, and he moved with shocking speed. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The official title was deliberately bland, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. It sounded like a reasonable wartime measure, but buried in the legal language was something unprecedented in American history. Every person and every business in the United States was required to surrender all their gold within 25 days. All of it. The exceptions were laughably small. You could keep wedding rings and jewelry. You could keep dental fillings. Rare coin collectors could keep genuinely rare specimens. Industries that genuinely needed gold for manufacturing could apply for permits. Everything else had to go. The government would pay $20.67 per ounce. Not negotiable, not market price. Just $20.67. Take it or face the consequences. And those consequences were designed to terrify. A fine of up to $10,000 or 10 years in federal prison or both. To put that in perspective, the average American worker in 1933 earned about $1,600 per year. A $10,000 fine meant more than 6 years of salary. Gone. And 10 years in prison was more time than many violent criminals received. For the crime of keeping your own property. For holding gold you had legally purchased. For protecting your family's financial security. But Roosevelt understood something crucial. Fear alone wouldn't be enough. Americans needed to believe they were doing the right thing. They needed to feel patriotic, not robbed. And so began one of the most sophisticated propaganda campaigns in American history. Newspapers across the nation suddenly filled with identical articles. Hoarding gold is unpatriotic. Hoarding gold prevents recovery. Hoarding gold hurts your neighbors. Radio programs featured interviews with economists explaining why surrendering gold would create jobs. Posters appeared in post offices and banks showing Uncle Sam pointing directly at viewers. Your gold can save America. Do your duty. Churches received talking points for sermons. Keeping gold was compared to selfishness, to greed, to abandoning your fellow citizens in their time of need. The message was everywhere. Inescapable. If you refused to surrender your gold, you weren't just breaking the law. You were betraying your country. You were the reason children were starving. You were the reason unemployment stayed high. The guilt was overwhelming, and it worked. Most Americans didn't view themselves as victims of confiscation. They viewed themselves as patriots making a noble sacrifice. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that would cost them everything. May 1st, 1933. Deadline Day. Across America, scenes repeated themselves in every town and city. Lines outside banks stretched for blocks. Elderly men carried cloth bags heavy with coins their fathers had given them. Women brought jewelry boxes containing gold pieces passed down through generations. Business owners arrived with entire safes loaded onto trucks. These weren't just transactions. They were funerals. Each person surrendering gold was burying a piece of security, a piece of independence, a piece of freedom. In exchange, they received paper bills. Federal Reserve notes that just weeks earlier they had desperately tried to exchange for the very gold they were now surrendering. The irony was lost on most. The results were staggering. In just 30 days, Americans voluntarily handed over approximately 3,000 tons of gold. Private citizens surrendered coins and bullion worth over $300 million at the time. Businesses and corporations added hundreds of millions more. In total, the government confiscated roughly 3,673 tons of gold from the American economy. To understand the scale, imagine this. That much gold today would be worth nearly $400 billion. It represents more gold than most nations currently hold in their entire national reserves. It was and remains the largest peacetime seizure of private property in human history. Now comes the part that transforms this story from tragedy into outright fraud. Remember the price the government paid: $20.67 per ounce. Americans were told this was fair market value. They were told this was the official price of gold. They were told they were being compensated fairly. All lies. On January 30th, 1934, less than 9 months after the confiscation, President Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act. And overnight, the official price of gold changed. It was now $35 per ounce. Not $20.67. $35. The government had just made nearly 70% profit on gold they had forced Americans to surrender. Let that sink in for a moment. The government compelled citizens to sell their gold at $20 per ounce under threat of prison. Then, before the year was out, they declared that same gold was actually worth $35. The profit was astronomical, nearly $3 billion. To put that in context, the entire United States federal budget for 1934 was about $6 billion. This means that almost half of everything the government spent that year was financed by defrauding its own citizens. Roads, military, government salaries. Nearly half came from this single act of legalized theft. Americans who had patriotically surrendered their family heirlooms watched helplessly as the government made fortunes from their loss. And there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. Not everyone surrendered quietly. Some Americans recognized the confiscation for what it truly was: theft disguised as patriotism, and they fought back. The most famous case involved a lawyer named Frederick Barber Campbell. He was a successful attorney in New York who owned gold certificates worth over $200,000. When the order came, Campbell refused. He hired the best constitutional lawyers he could find and filed suit against the United States government. His argument was simple and powerful. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution explicitly prohibits the government from taking private property without just compensation. And $20 per ounce, when the true value was clearly higher, did not constitute just compensation. The case wound its way through the courts for months, and finally it reached the Supreme Court. America watched. If Campbell won, the entire confiscation would be declared unconstitutional. Millions of citizens would have grounds to demand their gold back. The government's entire economic strategy would collapse. But Campbell didn't win. In 1935, the Supreme Court ruled against him in a series of decisions known as the Gold Clause cases. The court declared that Congress had the constitutional authority to regulate the value of money, and that authority included the power to nullify contracts that promised payment in gold. In other words, the Supreme Court ruled that the government could change the rules whenever it wanted. Your contract says you'll be paid in gold. Too bad. The government says gold contracts are now void. Your property rights suspended in the name of economic emergency. The message was clear. The Constitution protects you until it doesn't. So now, the government possessed thousands of tons of gold stolen from its own people, and it needed somewhere to keep it. Somewhere secure, somewhere symbolic, somewhere that would send a message. Thus was born Fort Knox. Construction began in 1936 in rural Kentucky. The government spared no expense. Walls made of granite, concrete, and steel, some sections over 2 feet thick. An entrance vault door weighing more than 20 tons, so heavy it required a special mechanism just to move it. The locking system was designed so that no single person could open it. The combination was split among multiple officials. All of them had to be present, each entering their portion of the code simultaneously. Guards patrolled 24 hours a day. Watchtowers, floodlights, minefields surrounding the perimeter. Later, as technology advanced, motion sensors and cameras. Fort Knox became more than a storage facility. It became a symbol. A fortress declaring that this gold now belonged to the government, not to the families who had owned it, not to the businesses that had earned it, but to the state. By 1941, more than 650 million ounces of gold sat inside Fort Knox, more than half of all American gold reserves, gold that had once been in the hands of ordinary citizens. Wedding rings melted down, coins collected by grandfathers, business reserves seized under threat of imprisonment, all of it locked away forever. So here's the question. Nobody wants to answer honestly. Did Roosevelt's plan actually save the economy? The answer is complicated and uncomfortable. Yes and no. Economically, breaking the gold standard gave the government freedom to expand the money supply. They could print more dollars to fund public works projects, to create jobs, to inject liquidity into frozen markets. Many economists argue this flexibility was essential to eventual recovery. Without it, the Depression might have lasted years longer. But here's what they don't mention. The recovery that followed was built on a foundation of broken promises and stolen property. The government proved that contracts meant nothing, that property rights could be suspended whenever convenient, that the Constitution was negotiable in times of crisis. They set a precedent that echoes through economics even today. When governments face financial pressure, they change the rules. They devalue currency. They confiscate assets. They break promises. And they always claim it's for the greater good. The Americans who surrendered their gold never received compensation for the government's 70% profit. They never got their family heirlooms back. They never received an apology. Instead, they got a lesson. A brutal, expensive lesson about the relationship between citizens and state power. When the government wants something you have, whether it's gold or property or freedom, legal protections become suggestions. Constitutional rights become privileges that can be revoked, and patriotism becomes the weapon used to make you surrender willingly what they're prepared to take by force. And what about today? That gold is still sitting in Fort Knox, supposedly. Officially, the United States holds about 8,133 tons of gold in various depositories. Fort Knox holds the largest portion. But here's something interesting. The last comprehensive audit of Fort Knox was conducted in 1974, 50 years ago. Since then, the government has repeatedly refused requests for independent verification. No journalists allowed, no outside auditors, no public tours of the vault itself. Why? Official reasons cite security concerns. Unofficial theories range from the mundane to the conspiratorial. Some believe the gold is exactly where it should be. Others suspect it's been secretly sold or leased to foreign governments. Still others believe the vault contains far less gold than claimed. We may never know the truth. What we do know is this. The government that once lied to its citizens about the price of gold while confiscating it under threat of imprisonment has never allowed independent verification of whether that gold still exists. The same government that profited billions from defrauding its own people refuses to prove they didn't do it again. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and the rhythm sounds a lot like deception.